Hey guys, tonight we're digging into that truth. This isn't about grand adventures, it's about the grim reality. We're exploring why, for most, life in the Wild West wasn't just hard-it plain sucked. We're talking about the crushing loneliness of a winter that could freeze a man's soul, the constant threat of dying from a simple infection, the back-breaking labor for pitiful pay, and the sheer, mind-numbing boredom that filled the long hours between moments of terror. This is the story of the grit, the grime, and the misery that the legends always leave out. Forget everything you've seen in the movies. Forget the heroic cowboys, the noble gunslingers, and the promise of a golden destiny waiting just over the horizon. That's a fantasy sold to sell tickets. But the truth, for the vast majority of people who actually lived it, was a lots and lots less glamorous. We're peeling back the sun-bleached, romantic veneer to look at the grit, the grime, and the profound, soul-crushing difficulty of what it was actually like to live there. This isn't a story of heroes. It's a story of calloused hands, aching backs, and the quiet desperation of trying to survive in a place that was advertised as a paradise but often felt more like a punishment. So, before we start our journey, find a comfortable spot. If these stories help you find a moment of quiet, feel free to like and subscribe. And as always, I love knowing who's out there listening in the dark, so leave a comment with your location and time. There's a strange comfort in shared stillness. Now, let the lights fall. Let the noise of the modern world recede, and let's step into the real Wild West, a place where the promises were as vast as the sky, and the disappointments were just as deep. It all begins with a piece of paper, a poster maybe, tacked to a wall in a crowded, dirty city back east, or a pamphlet, passed from hand to hand, its pages filled with glowing descriptions and dizzying promises. Land for the taking, gold in every stream, a new start for any man with grit in his soul. The West, it isn't just a place, it's an idea, a fever, dream of freedom and fortune. So you sell what little you have. You pack your life into a single, groaning wagon. You say goodbye to everything you've ever known, the familiar streets, the faces of your family, the very air you breathe, and you turn your face toward the sunset. You are chasing a myth. The journey itself is the first sign that the pamphlets may have been exaggerating. The Oregon Trail, the Santa Fe, the California, they are not roads. They are suggestions, vague trails of ruts carved into an endless, unforgiving landscape. You walk. For months, you walk beside the plodding oxen, through ankle-deep mud, across scorching plains. Your world shrunk to the canvas flap of your wagon and the aching soles of your feet. The promise was of majestic vistas. The reality is a monotonous, featureless expanse that seems designed to break your spirit. Days are a blur of heat, dust, and boredom. The sun beats down, cracking your lips and baking the earth. The dust gets into everything, your food, your water, your lungs. At night, you huddle by a small fire, the vast, silent darkness of the prairie pressing in on all sides. The sky is filled with a terrifying number of stars, a cold, glittering reminder of your own insignificance. And the dangers are not dramatic. They are mundane and relentless. An axle breaks in the middle of nowhere, 100 miles from the nearest tree suitable for repairs. A water barrel tips over, your precious supply seeping into the thirsty ground. Or worse, the water you find is tainted with alkali, a bitter poison that leaves you with cramping guts and a desperate, unquenchable thirst. Then there is the sickness. It sweeps through a wagon train like a phantom menace. Cholera, the blue death, can kill a healthy person in a single day, leaving them a shrunken, dehydrated husk. You learn to fear a simple cough, a feverish brow. You bury your dead in shallow graves along the trail, marking them with a pile of stones, knowing you will never see that spot again. The trail is not just a path. It is a graveyard, miles long. Here's a grim fact of the journey. The most common cause of death on the overland trails wasn't Native American attacks, as the dime novels would have you believe. It wasn't gunfights or stampedes. It was disease. Simple, dirty, waterborne disease. The second most common? Accidents. People being run over by their own wagons. Accidental gunshot wounds. Drownings in river crossings. The West was already trying to kill you before you even got there. You watch your fellow travelers, their faces growing thinner, their eyes hollowed out by exhaustion and fear. The initial optimism of the journey has curdled into a grim, silent resolve. You stop singing around the campfire. You stop telling stories. You just walk and cook and sleep and walk again. And when you finally arrive, when you reach the plot of land that is supposed to be your promised paradise, you are greeted not by waving fields of grain, but by a flat, empty, wind-scoured plain. There are no trees. There is no town. There is nothing but the sky, the dirt, and the sound of the wind, which seems to be laughing at you. This is your new home. This is the place you sacrificed everything for. And as you stand there, a small, weary figure in an immense and indifferent landscape, the full weight of the lie you were sold settles upon you. The dream is over. The work is about to begin. And you are already so tired. The pamphlets showed a charming little farmhouse, whitewashed and neat, with a curl of friendly smoke rising from the chimney. Your reality is a hole in the ground, or a stack of mud bricks, or a drafty box of logs that the wind treats as a personal instrument. Your new home in the West is not a symbol of your triumph. It is a constant, nagging reminder of your precarious place in this world. If you are a homesteader on the plains, your first shelter is likely a dugout. You find a small hill or a ravine and you dig. You carve a room out of the earth, shore it up with a few logs, and cover it with a roof of sod and brush. You are, quite literally, living in a cave. It is dark, damp, and smells perpetually of raw earth and roots. In the summer, it's a haven for snakes, spiders, and centipedes that drop from the ceiling onto your face while you sleep. In the winter, it is a cold, clammy tomb. Or perhaps you graduate to a soddy. You use a special plough to cut long strips of prairie turf, thick with the tangled roots of buffalo grass. You slice these strips into bricks and stack them, creating walls. The roof is made of wooden beams if you can find or afford them covered with more sod. From a distance, it looks like a part of the landscape, a small green hummock on the prairie. Here's a peculiar detail of sod house living. It was alive. The walls and roof, made of living earth, continued to grow. You might have wildflowers sprouting from your ceiling in the spring. You also had worms, bugs, and mice as permanent, non-paying roommates. And when it rained inside. Not a leak, but a slow, steady, muddy drizzle that could last for days after the storm had passed. You learned to eat, sleep, and live with a constant drip of brown water. If you settled in a forested or mountainous region, you might have a log cabin. This sounds more romantic, but the reality is one of endless maintenance. The chinking between the logs, a mixture of mud, moss, and sometimes manure is constantly drying out, cracking, and falling away. Your life is a perpetual war against drafts. You spend your days stuffing rags into holes, trying to stop the relentless wind from invading your meager space. The cabin is dark, the small windows covered with greased paper that lets in a pale, depressing light, and it is filled with the constant smell of wood smoke, a smell that clings to your clothes, your hair, and your very soul. Privacy is a concept that belongs to another, more civilized world. Your entire family, you, your spouse, your 6 children lives in a single room. You cook, eat, sleep, are born, and die within the same 4 walls. Every cough, every sigh, every argument is a public event. You learn to build mental walls, to retreat into a private space in your mind because there is nowhere else to go. The furniture is as crude as the house. A table made of rough-hewn planks, stools instead of chairs. A bed built into the corner, its mattress a sack filled with rustling straw or corn husks that are a paradise for fleas. The floor is packed earth, cold in the winter, dusty in the summer, and muddy in the spring. You sweep it daily, but it is a battle you can never win. The center of this small world is the stove, a cast-iron beast that is your source of heat, your cooking surface, and your only reliable source of light after the sun goes down. It is a demanding, temperamental god. You are constantly feeding it, cleaning it, and negotiating with it. The smoke it produces fills the small cabin, stinging your eyes and coating every surface with a fine layer of greasy soot. Doctors of the era noted the high rates of respiratory illness among pioneer women, a direct result of spending their lives breathing in the fumes of their own cooking fires. You try to make it a home. You hang a scrap of colourful calico as a curtain. You place a jar of prairie wildflowers on the table. You scrub the floor with lye soap you made yourself. These are small acts of defiance, attempts to impose a human order on a world that resists it at every turn. But at night, as you lie in the darkness, listening to the wind howl and the house groan around you, the illusion fades. This isn't a home. It's a temporary shelter, a fragile outpost in a vast and hostile wilderness. And you are a trespasser, living in a box of dirt, praying it will be strong enough to see you through to the morning. Forget the romantic image of the chuck wagon dinner, with cowboys gathered around a crackling fire, silhouetted against a crimson sunset, eating sizzling bacon and hearty beans from tin plates. Erase the picture book vision of the homesteading family sitting down to a groaning board of roasted chicken and garden vegetables. These are comforting fictions, myths spun to soften the sharp edges of history. The culinary reality of the West, for the vast majority of settlers, prospectors, and pioneers, was a relentless, soul-crushing monotony. It was a diet designed not for pleasure, culture, or communion, but for sheer caloric survival. In this vast and unforgiving landscape, your life is governed by a grim, unholy trinity of ingredients: salt pork, cornmeal, and beans. Let's start with the meat, the centerpiece of this bleak culinary world. The staple is salt pork or bacon, and it bears little resemblance to the neatly sliced, vacuum-sealed packages you buy in a grocery store today. The process begins in the crisp, cold air of late fall, a time of grim necessity. A pig, raised through the spring and summer, is butchered. This is not a festive occasion, but a day of hard, bloody work. The carcass is broken down, and the slabs of belly and back are packed into heavy wooden barrels between thick, coarse layers of salt. This is preservation born of desperation. The salt draws the moisture from the flesh, creating an environment where bacteria cannot thrive. In doing so, it transforms the meat into a dense, incredibly salty, leathery substance that can withstand months, even years of storage without spoiling. This durability comes at a steep price. Before you can even think of eating it, the salt pork demands a tribute of time and effort. You pry a slab from the barrel, its surface slick with brine, and begin the long process of desalination. It must be soaked in water for hours, sometimes for a full day, to draw out the punishing excess of salt. You change the water repeatedly, watching it turn cloudy as the brine leaches out. Even after this lengthy baptism, the taste is overpoweringly briny, a ghost of the sea in the middle of the prairie. To cook it, you slice it thin and lay it in a heavy cast-iron skillet. The sizzle it makes is not the cheerful crackle of fresh bacon, but a harsh, spitting protest. It curls and shrinks, releasing a small amount of precious grease, sow-belly gravy, that you will save to flavour your beans or corn pone. What remains in the pan is a hard, glistening shard of protein, often cooked to the consistency of a wooden chip to ensure any lingering pathogens are destroyed. You eat it with a grim sense of gratitude, chewing methodically. It is fuel, not food. It is the caloric energy required to swing an axe, to guide a plough, to survive another day. The pleasure is non-existent. The purpose is everything. Next, the beans. Pinto beans, navy beans. They are the foundation of your diet, the starchy bedrock upon which your survival is built. You buy them by the sack, dry, hard, and seemingly eternal. They are your constant companion. The sight of the large pot, perpetually simmering at the edge of the hearth, is a source of both comfort and despair. It means you will not starve tonight, but it also means another meal of the same bland, pasty texture. You eat them boiled into a soft submission. You eat them mashed and fried in the leftover pork grease. You eat them in a thin, watery stew, perhaps with a few precious slivers of onion if you are lucky. They are a reliable source of sustenance, filling your belly and providing essential protein. But after weeks, then months, of eating beans for at least one meal a day, the very sight and smell of them fill you with a deep, weary sadness. Your digestive system, unaccustomed to such a relentless assault of legumes, is in a constant state of low-grade rebellion. The bloating and gas are a private misery and a public unpleasantry, especially in the close confines of a one-room cabin or a crowded bunkhouse. The humble bean, a symbol of rustic wholesomeness in folklore, becomes your personal emblem of tedium. And then there is the cornmeal. Ground from dried corn, it is your flour, your cereal, your thickener, the versatile but profoundly uninspiring workhorse of your pantry. From this coarse, gritty yellow powder, you conjure a narrow range of sustenance. For bread, you make corn pone, a dense, crumbly, unleavened loaf, made from little more than cornmeal, water, salt, and perhaps a spoonful of bacon drippings. Baked in a skillet nestled in the coals, it emerges with a hard crust and a heavy, damp interior that sits in your stomach like a stone. For breakfast, you eat mush. You stir the cornmeal into boiling water until it forms a gritty, tasteless porridge, a gruel that you might try to make palatable with a drizzle of sorghum molasses. The children eat it with silent resignation. You use the same cornmeal to thicken your watery bean stews, giving them a slightly heavier body but adding nothing in the way of flavor. Sometimes, for a holiday or a rare celebration, you might have access to wheat flour. This is a precious commodity, freighted with the memories of lighter, softer bread from back east. A loaf of yeasted bread is a monumental luxury. Most of the time, if you have any flour at all, it is for hardtack. Also known as a sheet iron cracker or tooth duller, hardtack is the epitome of survival food. A simple mixture of flour, water, and salt is kneaded and baked until it is as hard and dense as a piece of lumber. Its primary virtue is its near indestructibility. It can last for years without spoiling, impervious to mold and insects. This durability makes it infamous, capable of breaking a tooth if you are not careful. The only practical way to eat it is to soak it in coffee or stew until it surrenders its hardness, dissolving into a pulpy, unappetizing mass that you swallow without chewing. The lack of variety is not just a matter of taste, it is a direct assault on your health. Fresh vegetables are a seasonal dream, a fleeting luxury. In the short growing season of summer, you might have a small, hard-won garden that yields squash, a few tough greens, potatoes and onions. These are hoarded and celebrated. But for the long, brutal months of winter, your only vegetable might be a shriveled potato or a sad, lonely cabbage kept in the root cellar. This profound lack of fresh produce leads to a host of debilitating nutritional deficiencies. Scurvy, a horrifying disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, was rampant. Its approach is slow and insidious. You know the symptoms because you have seen them in your neighbors, or perhaps you feel them creeping into your own bones. It begins with a deep, aching fatigue, a bone-deep weariness that sleep cannot cure. Then your gums become swollen, soft, and spongy, bleeding at the slightest touch. A metallic taste fills your mouth. Your teeth, their anchors dissolving, feel loose in their sockets. Most unnervingly, old wounds, scars that have been healed for years, can mysteriously reopen as the very connective tissues of your body begin to disintegrate. It is a slow, painful dissolution, a feeling of the body coming undone from the inside out. In a desperate attempt to ward it off, you might brew teas from pine or spruce needles, or from the wild rose hips you gathered in the fall, hoping their hidden virtues can hold the disease at bay. More often you simply endure it, praying for the spring and the first appearance of wild dock or dandelion greens. Even your drink is a source of misery. The coffee is not the rich, aromatic brew of modern cafes. It arrives as cheap, low-grade green beans, which you must roast yourself. This is a delicate and smoky task performed in a skillet over the open fire. You shake the skillet constantly, trying to achieve an even roast, but the result is almost always a mottled collection of beans, some burnt to charcoal, others barely toasted. From this you brew cowboy coffee, boiling the grounds and water together and hoping most of the solids sink to the bottom. The resulting drink is bitter, acidic, and often full of grit. You drink it not for its flavor, but because it is hot, a small comfort against the morning chill, and because the caffeine provides a much-needed jolt to your exhausted body. To sweeten it, you use sorghum molasses, a dark, slightly bitter syrup. Refined white sugar is a rare luxury, an expensive commodity shipped from afar, to be used sparingly, if at all. In this desperate landscape, any alternative food source was a godsend. One of the most sought-after wild foods was the prairie turnip, or Sorrelia esculenta. This starchy, nutrient-rich root was a long-time staple for Native American tribes of the plains, and quickly became a vital food source for settlers who learned of its value. Finding a patch of these, with their telltale purple flowers, could mean the difference between a full belly and another night of gnawing hunger. The root could be eaten raw, though it was better boiled or roasted, or dried and ground into a flour to supplement the endless cornmeal. The search for such wild edibles, berries in summer, nuts in the fall, a patch of wild onions became a crucial and often frantic part of your existence. Water itself, the most fundamental element of life, is a constant concern. You cannot simply turn on a tap. Your water must be hauled by hand, in heavy wooden buckets that bite into your shoulders, from a creek, a river, or a hand-dug well. You can never be sure of its purity. A heavy rain can turn your clear creek into a torrent of mud and debris. The water might be contaminated with animal waste from upstream, carrying the invisible threats of cholera or typhoid. diseases that could sweep through a settlement and wipe out a family in a week. In more arid regions, the search for water is a daily battle against the land itself. The only source might be an alkali spring, its presence marked by a telltale white residue on the surrounding ground. This water, saturated with dissolved mineral salts, is bitter to the taste and a poison to the body. Drinking it can lead to violent illness, gut-wrenching cramps, and a dehydrating diarrhea that only worsens your thirst. You learn to read the land, to look for the signs of bad water, the absence of animal tracks, the sterile-looking earth. Making a mistake is not an inconvenience. It can be fatal. In the quiet moments, lying on your straw-tick mattress at night, you dream of food. Your mind, starved of variety, conjures vivid fantasies. You can almost feel the crisp snap of a fresh apple, taste the sweet juice running down your chin. You remember the creamy tang of cheddar cheese, the soft, yielding texture of a yeasted loaf of bread, still warm from the oven, its crust crackling under your fingers. You recall the feasts of your childhood back east, with a longing that is a physical pain, an ache in the pit of your stomach that has nothing to do with hunger. Your relationship with food, one of life's fundamental pleasures, has been stripped of all joy. It is a grim, daily calculation of survival. It is no longer connected to celebration, to family, to culture, or to delight. It is a mechanical process. You eat not because you are hungry, but so that you will have the strength to work. And you work so that you will have the food to eat. It is a closed, exhausting loop, a cycle of misery and monotony, and you are trapped inside it, chewing on your shard of salt pork and staring out at the vast, indifferent horizon. In the stories they tell about the West, men die in a blaze of glory, with smoking pistols in their hands, their names etched into legend. The reality is far less dramatic, far more intimate, and infinitely more terrifying. In your world, the grand narrative of heroism is a fiction. You are far more likely to be killed by a mosquito, a dirty glass of water, a rusty nail, or a simple, throbbing toothache than by a bullet from a rival. Sickness is a constant, invisible predator that stalks your family through every season. It is a silent siege against the fortress of your body, and you have almost no effective weapons to fight it. The landscape itself, for all its stark beauty, is fundamentally hostile to your health. The very water you need to survive is a gamble. The rivers and creeks that look so clear and inviting, gurgling over smooth stones, can carry microscopic agents of death. Cholera, typhoid, and dysentery are spectres that haunt every water source. An outbreak in a close-knit community or on a wagon train is nothing short of catastrophic. It begins with one person complaining of stomach cramps. Within a day, they are racked with violent vomiting and a debilitating diarrhea, so severe it is described as rice water stools. Dehydration is swift and brutal, leaving the victim with sunken eyes and bluish, papery skin. The sickness spreads with terrifying speed, passed through contaminated water or the hands of those tending the sick. There is no understanding of germ theory. The calamity is blamed on bad air, a noxious miasma rising from the damp ground, or, in the depths of despair, on divine punishment for some unknown sin. The only treatment is to try and force water into the dying, to keep them clean, and to pray. You watch helplessly as your neighbour, healthy a week ago, shrivels and dies, and you go back to your own well, wondering if the same fate lurks within its depths. In the fertile river valleys, where the soil is rich and black, another menace thrives: malaria. You know it as the ague or the shakes. It is delivered by the buzz of a mosquito in the humid twilight. It does not kill quickly, but torments you in relentless cycles. First comes the bone-shaking chill, a violent, uncontrollable shivering that rattles your teeth and makes the simple act of holding a cup impossible. You pile on every blanket you own, but the cold comes from within, deep in your marrow. Then, just as abruptly, the chill is replaced by a raging fever. Your skin burns, your head pounds, and you slip into a delirious state, muttering nonsense and seeing phantoms in the corners of your small cabin. The fever breaks in a torrent of sweat that soaks your bedding, leaving you utterly exhausted, weak, and limp. You recover for a day or two, only for the cycle to begin anew. You might treat it with quinine, a bitter powder derived from cinchona bark, if you are fortunate enough to have it and can afford its price. More often, you rely on various folk remedies and patent medicines that do little more than dull the symptoms. resigning yourself to the weeks of incapacitation that leave you unable to work your fields or care for your family. And then there were the diseases of civilization, brought west in the lungs and on the skin of the settlers themselves. Measles, smallpox, diphtheria, and tuberculosis, which you call consumption, were devastating. These diseases cut a swath through Native American populations who had no generational immunity, wiping out entire villages with an efficiency that no army could match. For you and your family, they are a constant terror. A child's fever and rash could be a death sentence. Diphtheria could form a thick, grey membrane in the throat, slowly strangling a child before your eyes. Consumption is the wasting sickness, a slow, inexorable decline. A cough that lingers too long, a persistent low-grade fever, a growing weariness, these are the signs of a death sentence that will play out over months or years. You watch a loved one fade, their body dwindling until they are a pale, skeletal version of their former self, their hollow cough, a constant, heartbreaking rhythm in the quiet of the cabin. Hygiene, as we understand it, is a concept from another world. Your cabin likely has a packed dirt floor, a surface that can never be truly cleaned, forever harboring spills, dust, and microscopic life. You have no running water. The outhouse, or privy, is a pit dug in the ground, its location often dictated by convenience rather than a modern understanding of groundwater contamination, sometimes dangerously close to your well. In the summer, flies are a biblical plague. They breed in the manure of the livestock and the human waste from the outhouse, rising in buzzing clouds. They are a constant, crawling torment, swarming over your food as you try to prepare it, landing on your face as you talk, and settling on your sleeping children. You wave them away with a futile hand, but they always return, their tiny feet carrying a cargo of filth and disease from the privy to your plate. Personal cleanliness is a grueling luxury, not a daily routine. Soap is not a fragrant, gentle bar from a store. It is a harsh, caustic substance you make yourself in a stinking, laborious process of boiling rendered animal fat with lye leached from wood ash. It smells of rancid fat and chemicals, and is brutal on the skin, leaving it chapped, dry, and cracked. Bathing is a major undertaking, requiring the hauling and heating of gallons of water, and is a rare event, especially in the freezing cold of winter. You and your family live with a persistent layer of grime that becomes a second skin, a part of your identity. And under that grime, the small insults to the body, cuts, scrapes, splinters, and insect bites can fester and become raging infections. Imagine this. You are splitting rails for a new fence, your hands rough and calloused. A sharp splinter of wood drives deep into the palm of your hand. You curse, pull it out with your teeth, and think nothing more of it. But a tiny, almost invisible fragment remains embedded in the flesh. In a day or two, the area is red and swollen. A dull throb begins, a small drumbeat of pain. Soon it is hot to the touch, and a frightening red streak begins to crawl up your arm, a sign the infection is spreading through your lymphatic system. Pus, thick and yellow, begins to ooze from the wound. This is not a minor inconvenience to be treated with a bandage and ointment. This is a life-threatening emergency. Without antibiotics, a miracle still decades in the future, the infection can spill into your bloodstream, a condition you know as blood poisoning, and we call sepsis. You are seized with a high fever, become delirious and incoherent, and in a few days of agony you die, all from a tiny piece of wood. And what of medicine when such a crisis strikes? The frontier doctor, if there was one within a 100-mile radius, was often a man with questionable training and a very limited and brutal toolkit. His training may have been a brief apprenticeship, and his methods were often guided by the philosophy of heroic medicine. The thinking was that the body was overwhelmed by the disease, and the only cure was to aggressively purge the sickness from the system. This meant he would try to cure you by assaulting your body. He might bleed you, either with a sharp lancet into a bowl or by applying leeches to your skin, believing that removing bad blood would restore balance. He would watch you grow fainter and paler, not as a sign of weakening, but as proof the treatment was working. He would make you vomit with powerful emetics like ipecac, or administer violent laxatives like calomel, a mercury-based compound. Calomel was a poison in its own right, and its side effects were horrific. Profuse salivation, tremors, and the loosening of your teeth in their sockets. These cures often did far more harm than the disease itself, leaving you profoundly weakened, dehydrated, and far more likely to succumb to your original ailment. The doctor would leave, his job done, often leaving a dead or dying patient in his wake. A special kind of horror was reserved for dental problems. A toothache was not just a source of misery. A dental abscess could swell to block your airway or spread its infection to your brain, leading to a swift and agonizing death. A real dentist was a rarity found only in established cities. For you, tooth extraction would be performed by a blacksmith, a veterinarian, or the heroic doctor, using a terrifying iron tool called a tooth key. It was a vicious-looking instrument with a claw that was designed to clamp onto the crown of the tooth and a bolster that was braced against the gum. There was no anesthetic, save for a large swig of whiskey for you to numb the terror and one for the man holding the tool to steady his hand. You would be held down in a chair as the operator locked the key onto the tooth and, with a powerful, brutal twist and pull, ripped it from your jaw, often taking a chunk of jawbone and surrounding teeth with it. The searing pain, the sound of splintering bone, and the gush of blood were an ordeal that would haunt your nightmares. In the absence of reliable medical care, you turn to what you know, folk remedies and the promises sold in bottles. Your spouse or mother has a book of handwritten recipes for herbal teas, poultices and salves, a mix of genuine wisdom and pure superstition. You might brew willow bark tea for a headache, unknowingly using a natural form of aspirin. You might apply a poultice of chewed bread and spider webs to a cut. But you might also be told to wear a bag of foul-smelling garlic around your neck to ward off diphtheria, or to tie a live frog in a bag to your throat to cure a cough. The patent medicines sold through catalogues, and by travelling salesmen, were even more insidious. They came in fancy bottles with elaborate labels and compelling names. Dr. Goodfellow's miraculous elixir, Carter's little liver pills, Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. They promised to cure everything from nervous disorders and female weakness to the effects of youthful indiscretions. Their secret ingredients, however, were not miracles but potent narcotics and stimulants. Opium, morphine, cocaine, and vast quantities of alcohol. They did not cure your consumption or your rheumatism, but they certainly dulled the pain and made you feel better for a short while, ensuring you would become a compliant and often addicted repeat customer. For a woman, childbirth was perhaps the most dangerous time of her life. The momentous event happened at home, in the same bed you slept in every night, attended not by a trained obstetrician, but by female relatives and neighbours, the granny woman. These women brought experience and comfort, but not a knowledge of germs. The risk of hemorrhage, prolonged labour, and postpartum infection childbed fever was immense. This fever, caused by bacteria introduced by unwashed hands, could kill a new mother within days, leaving behind a devastated husband and a handful of motherless children, including a newborn who would now face a precarious future. The infant mortality rate was staggering. You learned not to get too attached to a baby in its first year. The small family graveyard on the edge of your property, with its disproportionate number of tiny mounds, was a testament to this brutal reality. You live in a constant state of low-grade anxiety about your body and the bodies of your loved ones. Every cough, every stomachache, every cut is a potential disaster. You learn to listen to the rhythms of your own health with a desperate intensity, to distinguish between simple fatigue and the first insidious signs of a real sickness. You become the doctor to yourself, your family, your livestock. You are pragmatic, you are resourceful, and deep down, you are terrified. Because you know with absolute certainty that in this beautiful, brutal land, a long and healthy life is not a guarantee, it is a miracle. The west of your imagination is a place of clear-cut morality. There are heroes in white hats and villains in black. Disputes are settled at high noon on a dusty street, a dramatic duel between two men with steady hands and a strong sense of honor. This, like most things you've been told about the West, is a carefully constructed fantasy. The reality of crime and justice in your world is far more chaotic, grubby, and personal. The most common form of violence isn't a stylized gunfight. It's a drunken brawl in a stinking saloon that ends with one man bleeding in the sawdust from a knife wound or a broken bottle. Or it's a dispute over a mining claim that escalates from shouting to shovels. Or it's the quiet, brutal murder of a traveller for his horse and the contents of his pockets. The law is a distant concept. You might live in a county that is larger than some eastern states, with a single sheriff and a handful of deputies to police it. They are days, sometimes weeks, away by horseback. By the time they arrive at the scene of a crime, the trail is cold, and the culprit is long gone. Justice is not swift. Often, it doesn't arrive at all. So, you learn to be your own law. You carry a gun not for dueling, but for the same reason you carry a shovel. It's a tool you might need to survive. You are cautious, you are watchful, and you do not trust strangers. Every newcomer is a potential threat, a claim jumper, a horse thief, a desperate man with nothing to lose. The towns that spring up the mining camps, the railhead cow towns, are not charming communities. They are raw, violent, temporary places, built for one purpose: to extract wealth from the land or the men who work it. The streets are rivers of mud, lined with false-fronted buildings housing saloons, gambling dens and brothels. The air is thick with the smell of cheap whiskey, unwashed bodies and despair. In these towns, the line between lawman and criminal is often blurry. A town might hire the toughest gunfighter available to be their marshal, not because he is a man of high moral character, but because he is the only one capable of intimidating the other tough men. Men like Wyatt Earp or Wild Bill Hickok were not shining knights. They were professional gamblers and killers who sometimes wore a badge. Their job was not to solve crimes, but to maintain a semblance of order through the credible threat of violence. The gunfight itself is a myth. The classic high-noon duel almost never happened. Real gun violence was clumsy, ugly, and often happened at close range and from behind. A man was more likely to be shot in the back over a card game than to face an opponent in a fair fight. The handguns of the era, like the Colt Peacemaker, were powerful but notoriously inaccurate. Hitting a man from across a street was a feat of pure luck. Most gunfights involved a lot of wild shooting and very few casualties, unless they happened in a crowded saloon where an innocent bystander was likely to get hit. Here's a quirky detail about Western justice. Horse theft was often considered a more serious crime than murder. In a world where your horse was your transportation, your work partner, and your only means of escape, stealing a man's horse was tantamount to a death sentence. As a result, horse thieves were shown no mercy. If caught, they were often hanged from the nearest tree by a group of vigilantes, with no trial and no appeal. Vigilantism was a common and terrifying feature of frontier life. When the official law was too weak or too corrupt, citizens would form vigilance committees to take matters into their own hands. They would round up suspected criminals, rustlers, robbers, or simply unpopular people, and administer their own swift, brutal justice. They held secret trials and carried out hangings, leaving the bodies to swing in the wind as a warning to others. While they sometimes caught guilty men, they also made mistakes, settling personal scores and killing innocent people in the name of order. For you, a homesteader living far from a town, the law is an abstraction. Your protection is your shotgun, your dog, and your own vigilance. When you see a rider approaching your cabin, your first instinct is not welcome, but suspicion. You watch from the window, your hand resting on the stock of the gun you keep loaded by the door. You are polite but wary. You offer water but do not invite them inside until you have judged their character. The greatest fear is not the lone outlaw, but the organized gang. Bands of rustlers who sweep through a valley, driving off cattle, or gangs of road agents who prey on stagecoaches and travelers. They are ruthless and efficient, and there is little you can do to stop them. You can only hope they pass you by. Even the process of claiming your land is fraught with conflict. The Homestead Act promised 160 acres to anyone willing to prove up on it by living and farming there for 5 years. But the best land, the land with water, was often snatched up by speculators, railroads, or powerful cattle barons who used fraudulent claims and intimidation to push out the small homesteaders. You might find your claim challenged, your fence cut, your well poisoned. The dispute would be settled not in a courtroom, but by a war of attrition, and the man with the most money and the most hired guns would usually win. You came to the West seeking freedom, but you have found a world where the only real law is the law of the strongest. You learn to be hard, to be suspicious, to keep your head down. You do not look for trouble, and you pray that trouble does not come looking for you. At night, you lie in your bed and listen to the sounds of the prairie. Every snap of a twig, every distant howl of a coyote sends a jolt of anxiety through you. The West is not a place of heroes and villains. It is a place of deep, unnerving quiet, where violence can erupt without warning and vanish without a trace, and where justice is a luxury you cannot afford. The dream of the West was built on a foundation of work, not the satisfying, noble work of the poets, but a relentless, body-breaking, spirit-crushing labor that began before sunrise and ended long after dark, day after day, year after year. There is no weekend. There is no holiday. There is only the endless list of tasks that must be completed for you to simply continue existing. If you are a homesteader, your primary antagonist is the land itself. The prairie sod is a dense, tangled mat of grass roots that has been growing undisturbed for millennia. It is as tough as a blacksmith's apron. To turn it into a field is an act of sheer, brutal force. Your plough is a simple breaking plough or sod buster, pulled by a team of exhausted oxen or horses, or sometimes by you and your sons, leaning into a harness like beasts of burden. You walk behind the plough all day, your hands raw on the handles, your boots sinking into the thick, heavy earth. The blade screeches as it tears through the roots. At the end of the day, you have turned over a pitifully small patch of land, and your entire body is a symphony of aches. Your back, your shoulders, your hands, everything hurts. And you wake up the next morning and do it all again. Once the land is broken, the work has only just begun. You must plant your crops, corn, wheat, potatoes by hand. You must guard them against a host of enemies, drought, hail, early frosts and plagues of insects. A swarm of locusts, a biblical cloud that darkens the sky, can descend on your field and devour your entire year's work in a single afternoon. You are left with nothing but bare stalks and a profound, hollow despair. If you are a cowboy, your life is not one of romantic freedom, but of long periods of intense, monotonous labor, punctuated by moments of sheer terror. The great cattle drives were grueling, month-long journeys, pushing thousands of head of cattle from the ranges of Texas to the railheads in Kansas. You live in the saddle, your body conforming to the shape of your horse. You smell of leather, sweat, and cattle. Your day is a routine of dust and noise. You ride at the edge of the herd, keeping the cattle moving, turning back strays. At night, you take turns on watch, riding a slow circle around the sleeping herd, singing softly to keep them calm. The slightest noise, a clap of thunder, the cry of a coyote can trigger a stampede. A stampede is chaos incarnate. The earth trembles as thousands of terrified animals surge into a blind, unstoppable torrent. You ride into the heart of it, your horse as terrified as you are, trying to turn the lead animals, to force the herd to circle back on itself until it runs out of momentum. You ride through a storm of hooves and horns, where one misstep, one fall, means being trampled into the ground. Many cowboys died this way. And what is your reward for this life of aching muscles and mortal peril? The pay is low, the food is terrible, and at the end of the trail, you are often left broken, friendless in a rowdy cow town. The cowboy life was not a career. It was a young man's game, a brief, brutal chapter before you settled down, if you were lucky, to a life of equally hard work on a small ranch of your own. For women, the work was different, but no less relentless. A woman's domain was the cabin, but that was not a place of rest. She was the first to rise and the last to sleep. She cooked every meal on a wood-burning stove that had to be constantly fed and managed. She baked bread, churned butter, preserved vegetables. Here's a fact that illustrates the sheer physicality of her work: laundry. It was an all-day, back-breaking ordeal. She had to haul and heat gallons of water. She scrubbed the clothes by hand on a washboard with harsh, homemade lye soap that cracked and burned her skin. She wrung the heavy, wet clothes out and hung them to dry, a process that could take days in the damp or freezing weather. She was a chemist, a cook, a doctor, a seamstress, a teacher, a farmhand. She made everything from scratch. She rendered lard, made candles from tallow, soap from ash. She spun wool, wove cloth, and sewed every stitch of her family's clothing by hand, by the weak light of a kerosene lamp. Her hands were never idle, and woven through all this was the constant draining work of bearing and raising children in a world with no medical support, no childcare, and no respite. The work is written on your body. The farmer's back is permanently bent. The cowboy's legs are bowed. The woman's hands are red, raw, and swollen. You are old before your time. At 30, you have the face and body of someone of 50. Your teeth are worn down from a gritty diet, your skin is weathered like old leather, and your eyes hold a deep, abiding weariness. There is no concept of leisure. There is only work, and the brief, exhausted sleep that separates one day of work from the next. You came to the West seeking a better life, a life of independence and prosperity. But what you have found is a new kind of servitude. You are not a slave to a master, but to the land, to the weather, to the endless, grinding cycle of labor that is the price of your survival. You have traded one kind of poverty for another, and this one comes with a view of an empty horizon and the constant, nagging ache in your bones. The promise of the West was, at its core, an economic one. It was the promise of wealth, if not in gold, then in land. It was the promise of independence, of being your own boss, of escaping the wage slavery and crowded tenements of the industrial East. This promise was the engine that drove millions of people into the wilderness. It was also, for most, a cruel and bitter illusion. You came west under the banner of the Homestead Act of 1862, a piece of legislation that sounds like a dream. It offered 160 acres of free land to any citizen willing to live on it for 5 years and make improvements. Free land! It was a powerful, intoxicating idea, but you quickly learn that the land is not free. It comes at a cost, one that is paid not in dollars but in sweat, debt and heartbreak. First, you had to get there, a journey that could cost your family's entire life savings. Then, you had to file a claim, a process that involved navigating a confusing bureaucracy and paying fees. And then the real costs began. You needed a plough, which was expensive. You needed a team of oxen or horses to pull it, which was even more expensive. You needed seed, tools, a wagon, a stove, a well. You needed lumber for your cabin, if you were lucky enough to be near any. You, like most homesteaders, did not have this capital. So you took on debt. You borrowed from a bank, in a distant town, or from a local merchant, who was often an agent for the railroad. The interest rates were predatory. You were trapped before you even planted your first seed. Your 160 acres of free land was, in effect, mortgaged to the hilt. Then you had to contend with the railroads. The railroads were the true kings of the West. They were given vast tracts of land by the government as an incentive to build the transcontinental lines. They owned the best land, the land along the rivers, the land with easy access to transportation. The land available to you, the homesteader, was often the marginal land, far from water, far from a town. The railroads controlled your economic life. They were your only way to get your crops to market, and they charged exorbitant rates for shipping. They often owned the grain elevators where you had to store your crop, and they would cheat you on the weight and the price. You were caught in a system designed to extract every last penny from your labor. You worked yourself to the bone to produce a crop, only to see most of the profit siphoned off by a faceless corporation 1,000 miles away. If you were a miner, you were chasing a different, more glittering dream. The stories of the gold rush, of men striking it rich overnight, were powerful magnets. You came to the mountains of California, or Colorado, or the Black Hills of Dakota, with a pick, a shovel, and a heart full of hope. You quickly discover that surface-level placer mining panning for gold in streams is a short-lived affair. The easy gold is found quickly. The real wealth is locked deep in the earth, in veins of quartz that require industrial machinery, explosives, and vast amounts of capital to extract. You, the individual prospector, cannot compete. So you go to work for the mining companies. You become a wage laborer, working 10-hour shifts deep underground, in dark, dangerous tunnels. You breathe in rock dust that will slowly destroy your lungs, miner's consumption. You risk your life with unstable dynamite and collapsing shafts. And for this, you are paid a few dollars a day, most of which you spend at the company-owned store, which charges inflated prices for basic goods. You are trapped in a new kind of mine, the mine of debt. The boom towns that spring up around the mines are cauldrons of vice and exploitation. The saloon keepers, the gamblers, the prostitutes, they are all there to separate you from your meager wages. The town is a fever dream of fleeting pleasure and long-term despair. When the mine plays out, the town dies, leaving behind a ghost town of abandoned shacks and broken dreams. A curious economic fact of the West was the currency itself. In remote areas, hard cash was scarce. People relied on a system of barter, credit, and company scrip. Your wages might be paid in tokens that could only be spent at the company store. Your credit at the local merchant was your lifeline, but it also tied you to him, making you unable to seek better prices elsewhere. Even the iconic cowboy, the symbol of freedom and independence, was at the bottom of the economic ladder. He was a seasonal migratory worker. his job on the cattle drive lasted a few months. His pay was low, around a 30 a month. At the end of the trail, after a few wild nights in a cow town, he was often broke, with no prospects until the next spring. He owned nothing but his saddle and his horse, and sometimes not even the horse. He was a wage slave on horseback. You came to the West to be your own master, but you have found yourself a servant to new masters. The railroad, the bank, the mining company, the weather. You are trapped in a cycle of debt and hard labor. Every year you hope for a bumper crop, a lucky strike, a good price for your cattle. And every year something seems to go wrong: a drought, a hailstorm, a dip in the market, a new, higher shipping rate from the railroad. You sit at your rough-hewn table at night, going over your accounts by the light of a kerosene lamp. The numbers never add up. The dream of prosperity feels further away than ever. You have poured your life, your youth, your health into this patch of dirt, and it has given you nothing but calluses and debt. The West was not the land of opportunity. It was a rigged game. And you, and thousands like you, were the ones destined to lose. You came to believe that winter was the ultimate enemy, the great white beast that you had to fight every year. But as you live in the West, you learn that nature's arsenal is vast and varied. Winter may be the long siege, but summer brings its own swift, spectacular forms of destruction. The land that you are trying to tame is not a passive thing. It is a wild, unpredictable power that can erase you in an afternoon. One of the most terrifying forces is fire. In the late summer, after months of hot, dry weather, the prairie is a tinderbox. The tall grasses are cured to a brittle golden brown. All it takes is a spark, a lightning strike, an untended campfire, a hot ash from a passing locomotive to unleash a prairie fire. You see it first as a dark plume of smoke on the distant horizon. Then you smell it, a sharp, acrid scent on the wind. Then you hear it, a low, deep roar like a freight train. A prairie fire does not creep. It gallops. It moves faster than a man can run, a solid wall of flame, sometimes 50 feet high, devouring everything in its path. There is nowhere to hide. You have no forests to retreat to, no rivers to block its path. Your only defense is to create a fire break. You and your family work in a desperate frenzy, ploughing a wide strip of land around your cabin, hoping to create a barrier of bare earth that the fire cannot cross. You start a backfire, a smaller, controlled burn that moves toward the main fire, consuming the fuel in its path. It is a dangerous, terrifying gamble. You are fighting fire with fire, and one shift in the wind can mean your own fire turns against you. You huddle in your cabin or dugout, the air thick with smoke, your eyes streaming. You listen to the roar of the fire as it approaches, a sound that seems to shake the very ground. You pray that your firebreak holds. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. You've heard stories of entire families found huddled in their root cellars, suffocated by the smoke, their small world above turned to black ash. If fire is the swift predator, drought is the slow, patient assassin. There are years when the rain simply stops. The sky turns a pale, hazy, unforgiving blue. The sun beats down with a relentless, brassy heat. The creeks dry up, the wells go low. The earth of your fields, once dark and rich, turns to a fine grey dust that blows away in the hot wind. Your crops wither on the stalk, the corn turns brown and brittle, the leaves of your potatoes curl and die. The small garden that was your only source of fresh vegetables becomes a patch of baked, cracked earth. The prairie grasses turn from gold to a lifeless grey. Your livestock grow thin, their ribs showing, their eyes dull with thirst. A drought is a quiet, creeping disaster. There is no drama, no sudden crisis, just the slow daily erosion of your hopes. You watch the sky, you pray for clouds, you perform small, superstitious rituals to try to summon the rain. But the sky remains empty, a vast, indifferent expanse of blue. The Dust Bowl of the 1930s was the most famous of these droughts, but it was just one in a long, cyclical history of them. The West has always been a land of feast and famine, of flood and drought. And then there are the insects. Not just the annoying flies and mosquitoes, but plagues of a biblical scale. Grasshoppers. You call them locusts. They can arrive overnight, a buzzing, clicking cloud that descends on your fields. They are a living, eating machine. They devour everything: the leaves, the stalks, the roots. They chew through the fabric of your clothes hanging on the line. They get into your cabin, into your food, into your hair. In a matter of hours, a field of promising corn can be reduced to a collection of bare, gnawed stalks. An entire year's work, an entire family's food supply, gone. There is nothing you can do but watch in helpless horror. Some people tried to fight them, lighting smoky fires, or trying to drive them away by banging pots and pans. But it was useless. The swarm was too vast, its hunger too absolute. Here is a quirky and somewhat disgusting fact. Some settlers, in their desperation, tried to eat the grasshoppers. They would be fried, boiled, or ground into a paste. Accounts from the time describe them as having a taste somewhere between a shrimp and a peanut. It was a desperate source of protein in the face of starvation. And still, there are other dangers. The rattlesnakes that live in the prairie dog towns and seek the warmth of your cabin walls. The wolves and coyotes that prey on your livestock. The sudden, violent hailstorms of the summer that can flatten a crop in minutes with ice stones the size of eggs. You live in a state of constant, low-level warfare with the natural world. You are not its master, you are its tenant, and the lease is always temporary. You learn to read the sky, the wind, the behavior of the animals. You develop a deep, fatalistic respect for the power of the land. You came here to tame the wilderness. But as you stand in the middle of your drought-stricken field, or watch a wall of fire race across the prairie, you realize the truth. The wilderness cannot be tamed. It can only be endured, and your survival depends not on your strength, but on your humility, and on a great deal of luck. So here you are. You have survived the journey, the shelter, the hunger, the sickness, the violence, the labor, the loneliness, the economic traps, and the raw, untamed fury of nature itself. You are a survivor of the American West. But to survive a thing is not the same as to be untouched by it. The West leaves scars, and the deepest ones are not the calluses on your hands or the lines on your face. They are the ones on the inside. The dream you chased across a continent has died, a slow, quiet death. The promise of a golden paradise has been replaced by the hard, gritty reality of your daily life. This disillusionment is a constant, low-grade ache in your soul. You see it in the eyes of your neighbors, in the weary slump of your father's shoulders, in the forced, brittle cheerfulness of your mother. You have all been part of a great, national bait-and-switch. You were sold a myth, and you are living the consequence. You have learned to live with a new kind of fear, not the sharp, immediate fear of a crisis, but a dull, constant anxiety. You fear the sky, which can bring drought or hail. You fear the river, which can bring flood or disease. You fear the silence, which can mean isolation, and you fear the stranger, who can mean violence. Fear has become a part of the landscape of your mind, and there is a profound sense of loss. You have lost your home, your family, your connection to the world you knew. You have lost your youth to endless labor. You have lost friends and children to sickness and accident. You are haunted by the ghosts of the people you were and the life you thought you would have. You are a person defined as much by your absences as by your presence. The West was supposed to be the land of rugged individualism, a place where a man could stand on his own 2 feet. But you have learned that individualism is a myth for the wealthy. Your survival has depended on a fragile, often resentful network of community. You have relied on your neighbors for help in childbirth, for assistance in a barn raising, for the loan of a tool or a cup of flour. But you have also competed with them for scarce resources, argued with them over boundaries, and watched them with suspicion. Your relationships are not built on affection, but on a tense, pragmatic interdependence. Here's one final, curious detail about the frontier experience. Many who endured it, who wrote about its hardships in their diaries with bitterness and despair, chose to stay. They had invested too much of themselves, their work, their families, their dead to leave. The land that had brutalized them had also, in a strange way, claimed them. Their identity was now inseparable from the dust, the wind, and the struggle. The West did not make you a hero. It did not make you rich. It did not make you free. It made you a survivor. It stripped you of your illusions and replaced them with a hard, unyielding pragmatism. It taught you the limits of your own strength and the vast, humbling power of the world around you. You sit on the porch of your small cabin, watching the sun go down. The sky is a riot of orange and purple, a brief, spectacular display of beauty in a land that is so often harsh and unforgiving. The wind is gentle for once. The world is quiet. You are not happy, not in the simple way you once understood the word. But you are here. Your family is inside. The fire is lit. You have enough food for tomorrow. In the face of everything you have endured, this simple fact, your continued existence, feels like a victory. It is a quiet, stubborn, and deeply human triumph. You did not conquer the West. No one ever does. You simply learned how to live in it. And in the process, it remade you into something new, a person forged in hardship, shaped by disappointment, and possessed of a strength you never knew you had. You did not find the dream you were looking for, but perhaps you found something more real. Sleep now. Let the dust settle. Let the vast, silent prairie hold you in its dark embrace. The ghosts of the West are quiet tonight, and you have earned your rest.